Good morning, everyone, and welcome to D Talks or Disruptive Literacy Talks. For those of us who are joining us from the western part of the world, a very good evening, in fact. And so far, the focus of our talks here at D Talks have been on foundational literacy and numeracy policies and pedagogies and disruptive solutions that can really work at scale. But the focus of today's talk is going to add an additional element to that, where we're going to focus on STEM education and disruptive solutions that can really help children uh, adopt and kind of learn and really explore their potential with the wonders of STEM education. We'll also be discussing more about how brain research tells us more about what the pandemic and the impact that it has had on children, how brain research explains that, and also how we can use that research to chart a way forward such that we ensure that the recovery, which is happening during the pandemic and post the pandemic in the future, ensures that the well-being of children is right at the center of it. And to speak on this, we have a very special guest. She is an award-winning educator, more than 20 years of experience as a staff development instructor, as a university professor. She has various accolades and recognitions and awards to her name. And she has also a very diverse and multifaceted experience. She has been a solar system ambassador with NASA. She has been a science teacher at STEM Lab, and she has been a TED coach. And this is just to name a few. But we are absolutely honored to have Ms. Shelly Munoz. Thank you so much, Shelly, for your time and for joining us here at Detox.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with you today. Thank you.
So, Shelly, I think before we start the conversation, it would be wonderful to learn more about, what really inspired and motivated you to, one, be an educator, but also be an educator for STEM education. It is something which we don't see a lot of educators on, maybe an increasing number of educators more recently, but it seems, and you've chosen like a very offbeat path as well to work as an educator. So would you like to share about what was your inspiration and motivation for the same?
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that everybody, when they look at their adult life, has to look at who they were when they were about in third grade, second grade, possibly. And so I was that little girl that would lay in the backyard and look up at the stars and wonder about them and wonder, could I possibly ever go to space? And I wondered a lot, and that's a great word, wonder, because I think that that's one of the most important things we can give our children is the opportunity of wonder. And my dad was a construction worker, and so sometimes he would come home and bring a bunch of supplies, just extra things. And I would go in the backyard and I would build like go-karts, or I'd build a clubhouse. And I think that just intrinsically who that I was as a child is how I became all of this today. It's the love and wonder and awe that I had when I was young. And one day my dad came home from a construction site with a chalkboard and he put it in my classroom. And my poor brother, I made him sit there and do math facts because I was so excited to get this chalkboard. And I think hence that just explains why I went into science and education. It was something I think I was born to do. And my poor brother, second grade, making him sit there instead of playing to do math facts. So yes, I think that is where the love of all of this, it's instilled in me. So I hope to bring that passion and curiosity to children around the world.
That's absolutely wonderful, and like you mentioned that what really allowed you to be this innovative educator and change maker was really that you had the opportunity to wonder as a child.
Yes.
And I think that's something which becomes very important, not just in science but in all aspects of education. So
totally
yes, would you like to share more about how important is it for an educator to let their students just wonder, irrespective of which subject they're teaching?
Well, a really interesting statistic when we look at creativity in education, NASA did a study And they found that 1,600 4 to 5-year-olds, 98% of them scored as creative geniuses. 98%. And 5 years later, they took those same 1,600 kids, and at that time, only 30% scored at that same level. And then 5 more years later, that same 1,600 kids, only 12%. So I think we need to look at what we're doing to the creativity, the awe and wonder in education, that those numbers, according to NASA and the research that they did, are dwindling so drastically. Because I don't know, I'm sure all of you have played with a little kid, and just the creativity of what they can bring, and they can take just a box and turn it into a spaceship and travel. And it's just so inspiring to see what a young mind can do. And I think the more we can do to foster that innate creativity, the better off we will all be.
That's very interesting how you've represented this. When we talk of STEM education, it's like you said, it's really about creativity. It's about developing skills and problem solving skills among children, such that they, I mean, the pandemic has of course told us that the problems are huge, but at the same time, problem solvers also need to be created, and it's not like just 1 or 2 people's problem, but it's in every community, in every country, in every city or village, you need problem solvers.
Exactly.
So would you like to share a bit more about what your experience has been as a STEM educator? What kind of interventions you have implemented or designed, and is there a particular age group from which you feel STEM education should be introduced or should not be introduced at this particular age group?
Yeah, no, I'm a huge advocate that STEM opportunities should be presented to children as early as possible. And I think if we just watch how really young children play, we can see that there is a lot of STEM in that. And as they enter, especially kindergarten, because that 4 to 5-year-old age is just such a wonderful time that their little brains are so creative and able to just come up with amazing things and find ways to foster that instead of moving away from all of that. A really interesting statistic as well is when you look at all of us adults out there, and more than likely it's just adults watching this, is that 96% of us are less creative than we were as a child. So when we're losing that much creativity and way to solve problems, I think that that's a real concern. As far as children, though, I think that we need to start STEM programming much, much, much earlier. There's a lot of interesting statistics as well in schools, especially here in the United States, where we don't even really look at science, technology, engineering, mathematics until high school, seriously. And if we were able to shift that paradigm and take it into kindergarten, first grade, and into those much more formative years, I think that we would create a better passion and love. I was reading some research from scientists who, in a lot of different fields of science, and most of them had no idea that they wanted to become a scientist or someone in the STEM field until maybe high school and or even college is where the majority of people decide. So I guess I'm an advocate for giving children opportunities that they may learn early on. Like, back when I was a kid, I had no idea that I'd end up being this, because certainly, I guess I'll show my age, it wasn't really cool for a girl to want to do some of the things that I wanted to do. And my mom would say, oh, no, girls don't do that. And so I am happy to see a lot more opportunities for women, particularly in STEM. But I do think as we foster kids, to give them lots of opportunities and give them opportunities to play and make mistakes, and not us adults to try to interfere in those thought processes. Let them have freedom and being able to express whatever it is they want to create. So I've taught middle school for the majority of my my career, and we did a really fun project where we did an innovative STEM engineering project and design, but it had to be something that was going to make the world better. it just had to be something. And so I was so inspired because a lot of time us educators or teachers, we like to give a rubric and, explain you need to do this, you need to do this. And I just said, no, I'm not going to tell you anything. I want you to figure out. And you would be so happy if you saw the different things that the kids created and the innovation of what they came up with. And some of them took designs that had already been an idea possibly, but put their own spin on it or made it different or possibly better. So I just think that I'm really inspired by our youth and the ideas of what they can come up with. And I hope that we continue to foster that opportunity for them.
That's very interesting. And when you talked about that statistic where we see that actually by the time the children come out of school, the creativity and it's actually going down. And this also resonates with just the day before yesterday we had Rachel Musson, who is an entrepreneur from the UK, and she started something called Thoughtbox. And she said some things which resonates with what you said, where she's like, children enter as butterflies but leave as caterpillars from the school.
That's a good analogy. I like that a lot.
Absolutely. And I think what you mentioned about and many of the initiatives, in fact, that you've taken have really kind of helped in helping children develop those wings and become butterflies. We were also curious about your experience with the NASA Solar System Ambassador. You have been an ambassador for many years, and also you have been a TED Ed coach. And so, how have these experiences kind of helped your understanding about what really helps children grow these wings? And if you'd like to share some experiences from there.
Yes, it's a wonderful opportunity that I've been afforded. I have been a NASA Solar System Ambassador for quite a few years now. And within that umbrella, there's a couple of other things. One of the one programs that I was the most excited for was the MAVEN project. And the MAVEN was the orbiter that was sent to Mars. And it just actually orbited around to get atmospheric data. Because as you know, we're this race to inhabit Mars. And so we had to look at the atmosphere and see so many different things. But with that, I was able to go to colleges, high schools, elementary schools, and talk to the kids and get them excited about space. I think that, the more that people come and share their experiences with, and I think that that's probably the most fun thing that being a NASA ambassador that I've gotten to do is speak at assemblies and so forth. One of the fun things through NASA is that actual rocks that came from the moon, I have access to them, and to have children be able to actually hold them. Now, supposedly, really, if you think about the cost of what it costs to go there to get them, they're worth millions of dollars. And I am not even joking. I have to kind of have them handcuffed to my hand with the briefcase, and I'm not allowed to let them leave my sight when I have them. And the kids just get such a kick out of that, because it's pretty extraordinary to think that you're holding of course, it's in a disc, it's not free, but in that disc, something that actually came from the moon, and to give them those opportunities of exploration in their own minds and I think right now, we're in just such a great time when we look at Sunday that Virgin just took off and did with Branson, and just did as we start to look at space travel for just, well, they say everybody, but I know it's going to be wealthier people. But nevertheless, it does give afford opportunities, because maybe, as he said when he was in there, that was his childhood dream. And as we give our kids these opportunities through like NASA ambassador opportunities. And then another great opportunity I had was through Honeywell. I was able to go through the Space Academy in Huntsville, Alabama. And that was a kind of quick astronaut training for teachers, and boy, was it fun. And then Northrop Grumman, I was able to go through Zero G's program, and that's where you take the plane in the parabola, and as it free falls, you're able to experience weightlessness here on Earth. And all I can say about that is there is a reason they call it the vomit comet, because Woo, I was fine until the person next to me got sick. And then, oh my goodness, but I did make it off the plane. But they do say it's an interesting kind of fun fact that if you get sick here on Earth, if you were to go to the ISS, you don't, and vice versa. If you don't get sick here, typically in the ISS, you will. But I think back to the question that you asked, it's just bringing innovative, fun stories to the kids, not being, I tell the kids all the time, like when you look at my graduation picture, I'm literally green. I'm like, I was so sick. But I think that we have to show that we're not all perfect. And there's a lot of, especially in the STEM field, there's a lot of, failure. And I guess learning forward is a good word that I'd like to say for that. You had asked me a little bit about TED. I love TED Talks. I'm not sure. I just find them inspiring because they're short to the point, and I've always really loved them. I became involved quite a few years ago of being a TED Ed coach, but I particularly like to be a TED Ed coach for middle school, which is a little bit unique because typically it's a high school, college thing. But when you give kids a voice, when you give them an opportunity to curate an idea, because TED is ideas we're sharing. And when you give those opportunities to kids, though, you do have to go through the format, you have to help them curate their speech. But when they're done, and just the amazing amount of growth that comes from them from being on stage and making a huge accomplishment, because I imagine all of us adults listening to this would be terrified to do a TED Talk, and many maybe have, and we all know it's super frightening. But to accomplish a challenge like that at 12 years old, woo, I'm telling you, and kids have amazing ideas. And I've always just loved when we have our conferences, the kids' talks, just the ideas that they come up with are always amazing.
Well, would you like to share some of these ideas as well? I mean, when we are talking about middle school, I'm kind of very curious to understand
Okay.
what are some of their topics.
One of my favorites was one of my students. She used cupcakes as an analogy of kindness, how to be kinder in society. And she brought in, a cup of different, making the actual ingredients for the cupcake, which I thought was really awesome. One of the themes for one of our TED conferences was transformation. And so one of them did this great talk about a butterfly and the transformational process of a butterfly. And it was just beautiful the way she did it. And to be a little bit different, when she started her talk, the lights were off. It was pitch black, and she had butterfly wings that had lights all through them. And so when she started her talk, boom, she turned on the lights, and then she started her talk. So it was this really beautiful intro into a very inspiring talk. But we've had talks about political, Democrat versus Republican, because in the United States, that's certainly always a heated topic, but how we can learn from our differences. But coming from a 12-year-old, it's really inspirational to hear their viewpoints on how to navigate through differences that we may feel politically. I'm just trying to think of some other ones because they've all been so amazing. And I'm kind of just drawing a blank right now, but it is really inspiring, the things that the kids come up with.
Right, that's absolutely wonderful, and I think it's also very disruptive idea in the sense, especially for traditional education systems where children's voice actually doesn't find a lot of space inside the classroom. So it's actually a very radical and a very, very interesting idea, especially coming from especially for education systems which are very traditional as well. One question, in fact, I had a follow-up question on the TED Talk, which was, what does the audience look like when these children are speaking?
For the conferences that I've hosted, I do a TED Ed youth conference each year. And so we just invite the community and all of their families. And luckily the kids get a lot of support, so we typically have a lot of people in the audience. So as you can imagine, being on a big stage and the lights and the audience, and the great thing about when you have lights on a stage, though, you can't quite see the audience, so the kids are never quite aware of exactly how many people are out there until they hear the applause. And so it's somewhat like that, but we do always have great community support. I'm always an advocate, and no matter what I do and the extracurricular programs that I bring into education, to branch out of the school. So to have community support, state support, even sometimes global support. And so I think that that's a very important aspect for the kids to see, and not be so confined within the walls of just the school.
That's absolutely phenomenal. Um, Here, I would like to shift our conversation to the current situation in terms of the pandemic, and how that has been a very unpleasant experience and often traumatic disruption for adults, kids all across the world, irrespective of which country. And of course, we have seen these challenges much more in countries like India and United States as well, who've been very badly affected by the pandemic. When we talk about education for children here, and how we move forward here, so what is your assessment of how pandemic has impacted the social emotional health of children, and in terms of, are we in the right direction of overcoming that, and what needs to be done? So broadly, if you'd like to share your views on that.
I do have concerns. I think that even children, we need to really give them a space to be able to talk about the experience that they are going through and or have gone through. It's a very adverse experience for all of us. It's very complex globally. And it's affected all parts of our lives. And so to just assume as an adult that children are going to just navigate through that on their own by themselves, they just can't. And a really interesting statistic is that anxiety has tripled among school-aged children since the pandemic. And so, especially here in the United States, we were having issues with anxiety, suicidal thoughts, depression before the pandemic. So the astronomical rates of how that's gone up is very concerning. And so I would encourage anyone who is an educator, teacher, or has children of their own to really give children that space to be able to articulate the experiences of how they feel and validate those feelings, because it is truly their feelings. One of the things about brain research that's really interesting is it takes 63 days to wire new brain neuron connections in the brain. So 63 days. When our children have gone through this adverse experience more than 63 days, they have now wired all of this negativity into their brains. And one of the things that happens when negativity is being wired in the brain, it sits in the amygdala, and the amygdala is where all of our emotions are. And so as a child, they're not quite sure how to process all of that. As adults aren't sure how to process all of that. And what then begins to happen is the amygdala swells slightly, which causes the hippocampus to go into overdrive. And that's why you've seen so many people during the pandemic with memory issues, because that's one of the major things that it affects, mood fluctuations and so forth. But the great thing about the brain is that it's definitely neuroplastic, which means that it is constantly changing. And those negativities that got wired during the pandemic can also be rewired. But we have to give children an opportunity, to discuss how they felt, discuss the isolation brought a lot of stuff out for them. And so give them a time to calm down, reflect, write out their emotions, journal, but to have an adult, maybe like SEL, social emotional learning system in place to give kids support, because I am fearful when school starts back, particularly here in the United States, we start back typically the end of August, that kids are just going to be thrown into classrooms again and expected to pick up. And, there's a lot of things. These kids have been in isolation for quite a long time. There's a lot of emotional needs. I think it's going to take time for them just socially to there's a little bit of awkwardness when you're in isolation for that amount of time, and to help kids feel comfortable about being back and just to the regular groove. I mean, even myself, there's times that I found myself feeling awkward. I'm like, why am I being like that? But it's because of just being on the computer for so long, missing my normal connections and social activities that I'm used to doing. So I think that that's a really important thing that we need to consider as adults for the kids.
That's a very important point where we see all across the world that a lot of discussions on policy about schools reopening and about preparing for a system where schools there might be, especially in India, we see a situation where there might be continuous disruptions over the next few months or a year or two, where children come to school and then suddenly there's a lockdown, so then they have to again be in remote learning. So it's very important that the socio-emotional health of children is right at the center of it, and not just like catching up and the losses in learning. It would also require teachers themselves to be first, putting their own well-being right at the center. Right,
Right.
they themselves have been through a lot as well. Any thoughts on how teachers can maybe help do that for themselves to start with?
I've been in the classroom for 20 plus years, and this last year, of course, was like no other. Like any educator will say, I found in my own experience that just being really authentic with the kids and sharing my own experiences with them was really helpful. When they could see that I too struggled every now and then. I'm not the most technologically advanced person. And so there was one day that honestly, I started to cry in class because I had worked so hard on this activity for the kids that was all digital, and one of the links weren't working. And I mean, just the fatigue of the pandemic and my own, having some issues with sick parents, etc. I just did. And I just said, guys, I'm so sorry. I said, I think that when children realize that all of us adults don't have all the answers either, that we can navigate through experiences together and we can discuss and figure out through it, that seemed to be a really huge benefit for me, because I feel closer to this group of kids that I only saw through a square for a year, which is really crazy. But I think it's because I was able to let down my guard. And I think sometimes as teachers, we want to, and you do need to have a role of authoritarian and to be, but I did kind of let all that down. And I was just really authentic and honest. And some days, one day I'm like, I'm struggling today, but then other days I'm like, hey, I'm doing great. How are you guys doing? So, but to give the kids the opportunity to understand that roller coaster of emotion, especially during a pandemic, is really okay. And hey, if you didn't get your work done, I think that, when we look at the adverse and different circumstances that all of our kids are, to be a little bit more flexible. I think that was the biggest change in my own heart, is having a lot more compassion towards the kids, flexibility and understanding of the experience that they were going through, and to try to meet them where they were at.
Right. Shelley, if we talk about what the pandemic has meant for STEM education, the present and future of STEM education, do you see any challenges which STEM education and STEM educators specifically have faced? And are there any new opportunities which the pandemic might have opened up?
I think we're always going to have challenges in education. There's always going to be financial, money, support, all of those kind of issues. But I'd really like to talk about some of the positive things that I see. I think that the pandemic, though it's been very difficult and there's a lot of negative from it, and I wouldn't diminish any of that for anybody, because a lot of people have been through a lot. But I'm excited about the possibility of change. When we look at, really virtually overnight, we turned classrooms into virtual classrooms, and we're quite successful. And I think that when we look at STEM education and we look at how it improves cognitive skills and the opportunity, though I do understand that there is a bit of a disadvantage that not all kids had access to technology, but it's given us a greater forefront of realizing the needs, I think that it's given school districts a bigger view of the equity issues that we have within schools. And I'm really excited about that because I want to see equal access for all children, regardless of any of the parameters in place. I think that when kids had better opportunities to learn coding and engineering via online, and it created better cognitive problem solving skills. And I think that this pandemic, it fostered a lot of ingenuity and creativity, which would lead to new ideas and innovations. So I think if we look at it positively and kind of take what we can from it and move it into a more forward thought of how can we change this into a more, because I would like to see education keep continuing up, not continuing on the threshold. I feel like it's been linear and stagnant for quite a few years. I want it to be innovative and change and really inspire a whole new generation of kids. And when we look at like all the things going on in the world right now, we certainly need that. And I think the pandemic also with the online learning encouraged a lot of experimentation, and that's a lot of risk taking. And we all realized we could do it and it was okay. And it created a sense of teamwork. The use of tech was pretty incredible. And as we continue to develop and improve those skills, I think globally it will create better kind of branches to create a better STEM opportunity. And honestly, this all encouraged to be adaptations and to be adaptive. That's a huge part of being in a STEM career is you have to kind of take a look at what's going on if you're engineering or whatever it may be, and be able to adapt to the circumstance of where you're at. And it gave us a lot of interdisciplinary lesson plans and ways to work with each other, which in some ways I thought was great. And then lastly, just bringing in more 21st century lesson planning that really is what our kids need. I think that we need to give them more opportunities, back to what we talked about previously with the creativity and opening up the technological issues and helping them through all of that. But I do understand that the kids too need for social interactive a classroom setting. But I do want to always try to be really look at problematic curriculum and try to find changes that we can be more proactive for our students.
That's very inspiring. Shelley, one concluding question that I had was you also have an initiative which I believe is called STEM Braced, where you also STEM Braced with Love, where you're looking at also helping underprivileged or underserved communities to access STEM education. In your experience from United States and maybe other countries also, how do we kind of address the access and equity issues regarding STEM education? If you'd like to share.
Sure. I'll just be really blunt. There's not equality or equity in STEM education at this point. Lower income children certainly struggle with it. So that's what inspired me to start the program. I actually started the program a little bit by it just happened because I had gone to the Honeywell Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama. And right after that experience, my son and I were going to work at an orphanage in China. And the people who ran it happened to say, hey, you're a science teacher, STEM teacher. Could you do some activities with us? And I was like, well, of course, that would be so much fun. So my son and I put together quite a lot of activities for the kids. These kids had never done any kind of science experimentation or activities. And what I found really interesting, nor had the college students who were volunteering for this particular camp. And so that's what kind of inspired me to think that I really deeply in my heart want equal access across the board. So we started where each summer we would go somewhere and do a camp-like experiences for very underserved kids who would have never had the opportunity to, one, be in a camp, and two, be able to do all the STEM activities. And it's been an amazing venture. And from that, as everything grows, when one door opens, another door opens, that we are actually currently working on building a school in Malawi, Africa. It's called Livingstone's Academy. My friend Hastings is just a wonderful person who takes care of up to 400 orphans a day. And so definitely education is very needed within the community. And so we saw that and decided to kind of put our focus more in trying to create, instead of just popping around all over, into one place to make a huge difference. So we're hoping that that will continue to work. And we're currently in the process of building the school. And, you know, honestly, this summer, we were supposed to go out, but of course the pandemic put everything far, far behind. But next summer, we're hoping that the school will be finished and we'll be able to offer, and of course, sustainability is all we're looking at in Malawi, Africa. We want for the kids to be able to be inspired and learn basic skills so that they too can create some sort of income to be sustainable within their own community. And so that's what we're excited about doing.
That is an absolutely wonderful initiative, and we, all of us here at Detox, would wish you the very best for
You.
the success of this wonderful mission. And Shelley, you've really shared some really wonderful ideas, which even for those of us here who might not be full-time STEM educators, but we can use these lessons to actually work on foundational learning as well. You've talked about giving voice to children. And you know how the wonderful experiences which you have shared have really talked about how, you know, children can be the masters of their own learning. They can be the masters of their own destiny. You know, the human mind has this amazing potential to you know, really write one's own destiny and reach the 100% of a child's potential. So thank you so much for sharing these wonderful ideas. I'm very sure that all of us who are watching this live and who will be watching this video in the upcoming time have learned a lot from what Shelley had to say, and will be able to replicate and kind of integrate some of these ideas in the work which you are doing. So, Ms. Shelley Munoz, thank you once again for your very valuable contribution to the Detox here. Thank you for your time, and we hope to connect with you soon again.
Certainly. I so appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.